All right, so what we're going to be working on today is the key features for sine and cosine curves. So let's take a look at the sine and the cosine curve, the equations. These are the standard form. Okay, they're the same. One's just with sine and one's with cosine. So I have y equals, remember that could be f of x. And I have a sine. Now don't worry about all the parentheses. Okay, it's just separating things. B times x plus c plus d, and notice the d is on the outside. So notice here inside the c that's being added or subtracted from the x, that's just shift left and right. And your d is on the outside being added or subtracted from the whole thing, your y value, which is going to be your shift up and down along the y-axis. And it's the same thing for cosine. The only difference between this over here on the right and this over here on the left is where the d is located. So d can be at the end, which is normal, but it can be written up front, in front of the sine and the cosine. All right, so now what you need to know are what a, b, c, and d are, and a couple of other things. All right, so let's start with the amplitude. Your amplitude is the absolute value of A. So your A is what's right in front of sine and cosine. Now, it is absolute value. And the reason why it's absolute value is because it's the distance. And remember, distance can't be negative. So A can be negative here in the equation, but when you're talking about the amplitude, the height, okay, it is distance. So it has to be positive. And what it is, it's the distance from the middle of the curve, which is the midline, to its highest point and to its lowest point. So it's how high it's going from the middle to its max, from the middle to its min. All right, and then we have the number of cycles, which is B. That's the number that's in front of X over here. That is the number of complete cycles, how many complete curves you will see in the interval from 0 to 2 pi. So the number of cycles, which is the absolute value B, is how many cycles you see in 2 pi. So it could be 1, it could be 2, it could be half of a cycle that you see in 2 pi. All right, the next one is called the period. It's a formula. You have to know this formula. It's 2 pi over the absolute value of B. And that would be how long it actually takes to see one complete curve. All right, the next one is the horizontal shift. That would be the C. That's the shift up and down. I'm sorry, that's the shift right and left along the x-axis. That's the add or subtract from the x value. Okay, that is the horizontal shift. And then we have the vertical shift, which is D. We will actually graph vertical shifts. We won't graph horizontal shifts, but you have to be able to identify the left and right shift. But we will graph the vertical shifts, which are up and down. That's your D value. Okay, that is also called your midline. It's how far up and how far down your middle of your curve is going to be. The midline is an equation. It is y equals whatever your D is, and it has to be y equals. The next thing would be the range. The range is how far up and how far down the graph is going, basically. So it's from the midline up to the midline down. Okay, remember it's your y value. It's the highest to the lowest point. All right, so let's take a look at the first equation. It says identify the amplitude, the period, the number of cycles, the midline, and the range. Okay, so let's start with the amplitude. Okay, so the amplitude is the absolute value of A. So remember where the A is. The A is in front of your sine. And in this case, it's the absolute value of -5, which is going to be 5. So what that means is from your midline, it's actually going up 5 and it's going down 5. All right, the next thing we want to find is the period. The period is 2 pi over the absolute value of B. So that's 2 pi over, B is the number that's in front of X, which is 2. So those reduce out. So my period is pi. Now remember, period means how long it takes to see one complete curve. So we will see one complete curve in pi. So every pi, every interval of pi, we'll see one complete curve. All right, the next thing we want to do is the number of cycles. The number of cycles is the absolute value of b, and my b is absolute value of 2, which is 2. So I see two curves in the interval 0 to 2 pi. So in a 2 pi interval, it's two curves. All right, the next thing we want is the midline. The midline is y equals d. Your d is the number that's at the end here, so it's y equals 4, which means the middle of your curve is 4. Okay, so now we can talk a little bit more about this amplitude. So from the middle, it's going to go up 5. From the middle, it's going to go down 5. And the last thing would be your range. All right, so I just need to move everything up a tiny bit. Okay, so your range is how far up and how far down it's going. So if the middle of your curve is 4 and it's going up 5, that means it's going to go up to 9. Less than or equal to y is less than or equal to, because remember it's a y value. And from 4, it's going to go down 5, which means 4 minus 5 is negative 1. So your range is 9 is less than or equal to y is less than or equal to 1. Okay, let's try the next one. Okay, so the next one, let's take a look at that. So we have the amplitude is the absolute value of A. So that's the absolute value of 2, which is 2, which means it's going up 2 and it's going down 2. The next one we have is the period. That's 2 pi over the absolute value of B. So that's 2 pi over B is what's in front of X, which is 3. So that's 2 pi over 3. Now remember, the period is when you will see one complete curve. So we'll see one complete curve in 2 pi over 3. Okay, the next one is the number of cycles. So if you're in pre-calc, you doubled up, your teacher used frequency. So in this class, we have to use the number of cycles. So you have to pull away from that word frequency and use the number of cycles here. That's what they'll use on your regions. All right, so the number of cycles is the absolute value of B. So your B is the number in front of X, which is the absolute value of 3, which is 3, which means we'll see 3 curves in the interval 0 to 2 pi. So in 0 to 2 pi, we'll see 3 complete curves. Next is the midline. Is y equals d. That's the middle of the curve. It's what is being added to the end of your, what's added to the end of the equation back here. So there's nothing being added. That means that's a plus 0 or minus 0. So that means my midline is y is equal to 0. So the middle of my curve is 0. And now what this means up here is from 0 it's going up to, and from 0 it's going down to. Now I could get my range. So from 0 it's going up to. So it's 2 is less than, negative 2 is less than or equal to y, is less than or equal to, and now it's going down to negative 2. So up to 2 and down to negative 2. And let's take a look at the last problem. Okay, so the last thing is to come up with the equation for the sine curve that has an amplitude of 4, a period of 5, and a range of negative 5 to 3. Okay, so we're going to start off with y equals, and we know it's a sine curve. All right, so the amplitude is 4, which means it's going up 4 and down 4, so I'll just put 4 in front. So I have a period of pi. Now, what I get from the period is the b value. So remember, period is 2 pi over b. So I have 2 pi over b has to equal pi. So if I cross multiply so that I could solve for b, I get b pi is equal to 2 pi. Divide by pi, and I get b is equal to 2. So now I know that my 2 goes here, my 2x. And then I need to use the range, this range here, to get my midline, what I'm going to add back at the end, or subtract at the end. So let's see what it's going to be, either add or subtract. All right, so I'm going up to 3 and down to -5. So I need the middle, this midline. So just add them together, 3 plus -5, you get -2. And then I want the middle, so divide by 2, and I get -1. So my midline is y is equal to -1, so it's a -1 at the end. So it is y is equal to 4 sine 2x minus 1. All right, just one other thing. Back at the first problem, if you could just go back to the first problem for 1 second. I wrote the range wrong. So please go back to the first problem right here where I wrote the range. So my bad, I wrote the range actually backwards. I put your negative has to go in front. Your smallest value is to the left. So it's -1 is less than or equal to y is less than or equal to 9. So just cross that off and make sure your smallest number is always on the left, your largest number is always on the right, and always use the less than symbols with y in the middle since it's the range. Okay, that's it, and have a good night. We'll practice some more in class tomorrow.